The Silver Spade was named for a company's 25th birthday, and it ate an entire county. 7,000 tons of American steel, and 41 years later, it dug its own grave. So how does a 14 million pound machine end up cut into scrap at the bottom of the last hole it dug, on ground that just sold again in 2026? It dug a hole nobody could climb out of. It starts in Harrison County in 1965. In the fall of that year, in a field outside Cadiz, Ohio, a crew of welders was still bolting the thing together. It had arrived in pieces on flat cars because nothing that size can be driven anywhere, so they built it where it would work. That is the first thing to understand about the Silver Spade. It was not delivered. It was grown on site, out of a hillside that used to be somebody's pasture. Finished, it stood 191 feet to the tip of the boom. 19 stories. It measured 59 feet across at the ground, about the width of an 8-lane highway. The boom ran 200 feet. The bucket at the end of it held 105 cubic yards, which is a number that means nothing until you say it a different way. 315,000 pounds of rock and dirt in a single bite. 157 tons. Then it swung a half circle and dropped that load 390 feet away, as high as a 14-story building, and came back for more. All night, with the lights on. 14 main motors, peaking at 13,500 horsepower. 8 crawler assemblies underneath, each with its own motor, because the weight had to be spread out, or the machine would sink into the ground it was standing on. And one man, in a chair, with 2 hand levers and 2 foot pedals. That is the part nobody believes. The largest working machine in the United States was run the way you run a backhoe. Hands, feet, a windshield, a thermos. Here is what gets left off the postcards. The Silver Spade had no engine. Behind it, always, ran a cable carrying 7,200 volts, a cable that weighed 20 pounds for every foot of its length, dragging through the mud like something it was towing. Cut that cord, and the biggest machine in America is a statue, and it barely moved. On its crawlers, the Spade traveled at a walking pace slower than a walk, a few hundred feet in a shift, dragging that cable behind it like a leash. It did not travel to the coal. It stood in one place, tore down everything it could reach, took a step, and started again. So it was never a machine the way a truck is a machine. It was an appliance. It was the far end of a power plant plugged into a wall, and the wall was Ohio. Hanna Coal Company, a division of Consolidation Coal, bought it and put it to work in November of 1965. The name was corporate sentiment, Silver, for the company's silver anniversary. 25 years in business, celebrated with a shovel that could remove a hill. That was just how coal came out of Ohio. At least, that's what everyone thought. The Spade did not invent that appetite. It inherited it. 20 years earlier, the same coalfield had received a shovel called the Tiger. It came from Marion, Ohio, in roughly 63 trainloads of parts, and by 1944, it was digging coal for the steel mills fighting the Second World War. At the time, it was called the largest shovel in the world. It held that title for about a decade. Then came the Mountaineer in 1956, 16 stories tall, the first of these giants with an elevator built in, so the crew didn't have to climb to the controls. Each one was bigger because the math demanded it. Strip mining pays when the dirt on top runs about 20 to 1 against the coal underneath. 20 feet of hillside for 1 foot of seam. That ratio is why a coal bed 5 feet thick could justify tearing down 200 feet of Ohio, and why the machines kept growing. The seams weren't getting richer. The overburden was getting deeper, and somebody had to lift it. Hanna was built to move it fast. Its preparation plant near Cadiz opened in 1951 and could clean over 1,200 tons of coal an hour, one of the largest such plants on Earth at the time. In 1956, the company laid a 10-inch pipeline, 108 miles of it, from that plant to an electric generating station outside Cleveland. Coal was crushed, mixed with water, and pumped north as slurry. Look at what that means. Current ran south into the coalfield to power the shovels. Coal ran north out of it to make the current. The county in the middle was just the wire, and the people who lived on that wire knew exactly what was happening to them. In 1940, a news agency in Cadiz was selling a souvenir postcard of local mining scenes. The caption on it said, in plain language, that this was where they destroy good farms to get the coal. Not a protest sign, a postcard, something you'd mail to your cousin. Ohio, to its credit, acted early. Farm groups pushed through one of the country's first strip mine laws in 1947, after the Morgan County Grange warned that stripping was a menace to the life of the county. By 1953, the Ohio Grange was reporting that land in the state's strip-mined areas was left practically worthless. So it wasn't that Ohio had no law. Ohio had a law before almost anybody. The law just didn't require anything, which meant that when Hannah decided to celebrate, it could throw a party. In January of 1967, the company held an open house at its new Egypt Valley mine in Belmont County. An estimated 25,000 people came. They drove in from Cleveland, from Akron, from Canton, and parked in the mud to stand under the Silver Spade's twin sister, a shovel called the Gem of Egypt, and look up. The mine spread across 96,000 acres. Production was projected at 20,000 tons a day, and the company forecast 30 to 40 years of it. Visitors were handed literature explaining the wonderful things that would be done with the land afterward. One suggestion was that the spoil piles could be used as ski slopes. 9 miles away sat the village of Hendrisburg. Florence Bethel worked there as a telephone operator and was taking college classes on the side. She later told a reporter from the New York Times that it started around Christmas of 1969. You could feel the blasting from 3.5 miles off. She had a new sealed well, 53 feet deep, and the water turned so muddy it clogged the valves. Her basement walls cracked. She worked nights, so she needed to sleep in the daytime, and she could not. She called the company and asked them to ease up. It got worse. Her grade average was a 3.2. It fell to D's and F's. She dropped out. She sued Hannah for $107,500 and moved into a mobile home south of Barnesville. In January of 1972, a former newspaperman from the county published an opinion piece in that same paper under a title that read like a death notice, "Say Goodbye to Hendrisburg." His argument was not about scenery. It was that the farms had started going in 1967, when the big shovels moved in, and that a town whose families have all been bought out is not a town anymore. It is an address. She was not unusual. She was documented. In 1971, a law professor at Case Western Reserve looked at Belmont County and found that of roughly 346,000 total acres, about 200,000 had been sold, leased, or optioned to coal interests. 2 out of every 3 acres in the county spoken for. A congressman from the area, quoted on the front page of the Times in December of 1970, put it more bluntly. "They're turning this beautiful place into a desert," he said. "They'll take anything that's black and will burn." And notice who left and who stayed. The company bought out landowners, and the ones who could take the check and start over took it. The ones who couldn't kept the blasting, the cracked foundations, and the yellow water. Stripping didn't just sort the land, it sorted the people. by whether they could afford a second life somewhere else. By 1972, the good coal north of the highway was going fast. The rest of it lay on the other side of Interstate 70. Which brings us to the strangest deal in the history of American road building. Back in 1964, when the interstate was being routed through the coalfield, the company objected that the highway would slice its property in two. So the state of Ohio, with the approval of the United States Secretary of Transportation, agreed to something remarkable. 2 underpasses would be built for coal trucks, and the company would be permitted to walk its mining equipment directly over the surface of a federal interstate highway, 10 separate times over a period of 40 years. The public built the road. The company got a key to it. By then, the politics had shifted. Ohio had a new governor who made strip mine reform a priority, and a tougher state law took effect on April 10, 1972, though industry lawsuits kept parts of it tied up for years. In Barnesville, a village council member named Richard Garrett had formed a group called Citizens Organized to Defend the Environment after neighbors came to him with blast damage. They sued in federal court to stop the crossing. On December 15, 1972, a district judge dismissed the case. The 1964 agreement was valid. The shovels could cross. They went on January 4, 1973, in bitter cold. Not the gem which had drawn too much national press, but the Mountaineer at £5.5 million and the Tiger at £4.5. Crews laid down 6 feet of crushed stone and earth and covered it with heavy timber mats, a temporary land bridge so the pavement wouldn't crack. Traffic was detoured onto a state route. Bulldozers worked around the base of the machines like tugboats. They moved at about 3 miles an hour, and by 6:30 that evening, it was over. It made the network evening news. Protesters stood along the route. So did miners. A bulldozer operator at the mine had already said his piece on camera. If that machine can't cross the road, he said, 322 of us are out of work. He added that if the publicity kept up, the miners would boycott the businesses in town, and then there wouldn't be a town left. So the story we've been told about that morning is wrong. It wasn't environmentalists against workers. It was a room full of people with no leverage arguing about which direction the damage should fall, while the party that held all the leverage waited quietly for its permit. Nobody in that argument owned the coal. 5 years later, in August of 1977, President Carter signed the first real federal strip mining law. Garrett was invited to the Rose Garden. So was the Ohio professor who had spent a decade photographing the high walls. The law finally arrived. The market was already leaving. Ohio coal is high in sulfur. Through the 1980s, the market for it fell apart, and mine employment fell with it. Along the Ohio River, the mills were dying at the same time. Whole towns emptied out. The Silver Spade went quiet for about 7 years. Not scrapped, just switched off, sitting in a field with its cord lying in the weeds. 20 pounds a foot, going nowhere. It came back in 1989. And here is how. Its sister, the Gem of Egypt, dug her last shovelful in 1988. So the company cut her up and used the pieces to rebuild the spade. Bearings, motors, structural steel. The last of the giants stayed alive for another 17 years by wearing its twin. It wasn't the best machine that survived. It was the one they could still find parts for, and the parts came off the only other one like it. Everything else went down in the same decade. The Mountaineer stopped digging in 1979 and was cut apart in 1988. The Big Hog went in 1985. The Captain, the largest shovel ever built, was scrapped in 1992. The River King followed in 1993. Meanwhile, the state was busy renaming what was left. In the mid-1990s, Ohio established the Egypt Valley Wildlife Area, roughly 18,000 acres in Belmont and Guernsey counties. About 80% of it had been strip mined. The last active mine inside it finished in 1998. It was bought largely with federal money that comes from taxes on guns and ammunition, which is to say, hunters paid to take back the ground the shovels had turned over. And Egypt Valley was one piece of it. By the state's own accounting, more than 720,000 acres of Ohio have been strip mined. Roughly 1,300 miles of Ohio creeks and streams run orange, with drainage out of old workings, which is the color the water turns when you leave iron and sulfur open to the rain for 50 years. The land wasn't healed. It was relabeled and handed to the public with the high walls still standing in it. And the spade kept working, chasing the last strippable seam in eastern Ohio toward a ramp it would not finish. April 3rd, 2006 was its last production day. Then it started the slow climb out of the pit toward the spot where it was supposed to retire. Days later, it stopped. The roller assembly under the house, the ring, the entire 14 million pound machine turns on, failed. Repair estimates ran around $1.5 million. Nobody was going to spend that on a shovel with no coal left to dig, so it stopped where it stood, below the rim, with unreclaimed high walls around it. It never made it up the last ramp. For 15 years, a group of retired miners and local officials called the Harrison Coal and Reclamation Historical Park had been raising money to save it. They were told they could have it for $2.5 million. About $700,000 of that was the scrap value. The other $1.6 million was the cost of reclaiming the pit the machine was sitting in, because a museum built around it would still have to meet state and federal law. They raised roughly $800,000. That was more than the scrappers were paying. It was refused. Their president said afterward that the message he heard was simple. You were never going to get it, and we blew smoke at you for 15 years. Scrapping began in late January of 2007. On February 9th, they dropped the boom with explosives, which ended any further discussion. By the 1st of March, most of it was gone. The bucket and the cab were saved and sit today on Stumptown Road outside Cadiz. 2 of the bucket's 7 teeth had already been torched off before the volunteers could take it. Now here is the part that reaches into this year. On June 29, 2026, an Ohio commission approved 21 bids to allow hydraulic fracturing under more than 15,000 acres of public land. Most of the bids received no discussion. Nearly 13,000 of those acres are inside the Egypt Valley Wildlife Area. The reclaimed strip mine, the Spade and its sister made. One Oklahoma company won 4,360 of those acres for $76,306,755. Lease bonuses for that single round of bidding topped $241 million. Days earlier, the governor had signed a bill cutting the commission's decision window in half to 90 days. Sit with the arithmetic. $2.5 million was too much to save the machine. That same ground, one parcel of it, just sold for 30 times that. The county is being wired again, this time from underneath. Drive out to Stumptown Road, and the bucket is just sitting there in the open weather, rust-colored, 5 teeth where there used to be 7. Children climb inside it, 157 tons at a time, and now it holds a kid in a winter coat. That's what's left of a machine named after a company's birthday, in a state that company no longer operates in, above a valley that has been sold twice since the digging stopped. It dug a hole nobody could climb out of. The men who ran it were not villains. They were a few hundred people in a chair with 2 levers and 2 pedals, doing the only work the county had for a company that was always going to leave. What they uncovered is still being leased out from under the grandchildren who hunt there. If this is your part of the country or your family's, tell me in the comments what the shovels took from your town. And if you want more of these, subscribe, because we are working our way through the machines nobody thinks about.